Yes, I am very excited to talk about this one. So this article actually it comes from Mr. Ronald Bruce Meyer. He published this on Free Thought Almanac about 10 years ago in 2011. But we're talking about the Great Disappointment, which is equal parts funny and sad. So so yeah, this month will or this week actually will be the anniversary of the Great Disappointment. This happened in the 1840s, thanks to a man named William Miller. He was a Baptist preacher who truly believed that every single line in the Bible was equally important. Nothing could be thrown away. And he had come to this, like many other people, made these calculations to pinpoint exactly when Jesus would return and the end times would be here. His initial prediction was for sometime between March 1843 and March 1844. And much to his disappointment, April came, and he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I used the wrong calendar." So he switched to using the rabbinic Jewish calendar and predicted, "No, this will happen in April." And of course, we're still here, so you know where the story goes. April came and went, and that was disappointing. And he said, "Oh, I am so sorry. I was mistaken. This is actually going to happen in August." And keep in mind, he actually had quite a few followers. This is, the Millerites were. They're not a massive Christian denomination, but there were enough followers that this is an important part of history. Naturally, August came and went, nothing happened, and he said, "That is it. October 22nd. You've heard it here. October 22nd. Jesus will return." Um, and it's so amazing that there were so many people who were heartbroken and disappointed to the point where they were physically ill for days because, of course, October 23rd came and the world was still here and just fine. And so this is what is known as the Great Disappointment. There were quite a few people who literally fell ill and could not leave their house. They were so sick and so heartbroken, and they didn't know what was happening. How could this have happened? We were so sure. But of course, you can't admit, "Oh, perhaps we were wrong and Jesus was never coming." No. Of course, that couldn't happen. And so you actually had quite a few different segments sort of break off from the Millerites. You had people who claimed that, "Oh, the doors were shut, and so perhaps everybody who was going to go has gone, and we're just stuck here," and that sucks. That is like the second Great Disappointment. They weren't super popular. Disappointment 2.0. There are other people who had looked back at scripture and had said, "Oh, perhaps the door isn't shut and we can still be saved, so we just have to keep waiting." And it's interesting. The top two sects of these broken-hearted Millerites actually later became the Advent Christian Church and the Seventh-day Adventists. So this sort of funny and sad story that we've heard a million times of, "Oh no, my end of the world prophecy was wrong," actually still exists as churches today. It's an interesting story.
It is, and one thing that's you've just reminded. Didn't write this down in my show notes at all. It's literally just listening to you. It's just that this is carrying on a long tradition from the beginning of Christianity, because there's a scholarly kind of almost consensus that Jesus himself was a rabbinic end of the world preacher who was basing what he believed on the book of Daniel.
Mhm.
And he believed that it's thought by some scholars that the world was going to end in his own lifetime. And when it didn't, the texts had to be his words had to be reinterpreted. So by the time you got to John, and John writing his gospel, Jesus wasn't talking about the end of the world in his own lifetime. What he was doing, he was talking about a kingdom coming far in the future and a heaven in the sky that everyone went to, rather than the Daniel kind of idea that heaven was going to be on earth for 1,000 years. So this has got a long tradition.
And Jesus does also say, like, at the very least, that his followers are going to, like, some of his followers will still be alive when the end comes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Right, so even though he acknowledged it wasn't in his own life, he still believed, and I say he as in the written Jesus, not the actual Jesus, because we don't know, um, still says that within your guys' lifetimes, and that has to be
Mhm.
reconciled and tossed around by all these different people who are calculating now these modern dates, right? There has to be all this justification done. But you're right, it goes back to the very, very, very beginning of the teachings, and he said, you know, my followers, like, some of
Mhm.
you will still be alive when the end comes.
Yeah, it's a Matthew 16:28. You know, it's I can only imagine it that that was the initial great disappointment. It's
It's
another
been
Christian
disappointing ever
tradition. There's
since.
there's there wasn't a pagan holiday, so they didn't co-opt it, but it's, it's yeah, it's interesting too, because I, I've talked to some friends who are theologians, and really there was sort of this period of time after, allegedly after Jesus's death, where people were upset because they didn't think he was coming back. They said, "Wait,
yeah,
you know, you said, truly I say to you, like, not all of you will taste death before this happens." And then, what do you know, Rome comes and ends his life. And they're sort of scratching their head, and that's,
Mhm.
it's interesting, with Paul really being the one who sort of brings up this movement of Jesus has returned from this vision. Yeah, that was sort of the original good news. But there's there's so many people throughout history who have done the calculations and say that the world will end, you know, either 2012 or Y2K, or, there's this long history, and I know people today who believe that we're in the end times.
Yep.
Um
Hmm.
Yep. I have family members who believe that. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you also, so Richard has said you made him think of something that wasn't in his show notes, and you did the same thing for me. One of the things that you made me think about was how eager these people are for the end to come. Like, I mean, it's one thing if you think that eventually, hey, I'm gonna die eventually. That's not gonna change, but I'll be going to heaven, so that's great. And eventually, when I do die, I'll go to heaven. Fantastic. But for people to be cheering or like really wanting the end of this particular reality or life to end so that they can go to heaven, it really, it's kind of frightening, like that people are so eager for that to happen.
Mm.
Not only because they're eager for this particular life to end, which I kind of dig, um, but because they just, the thought of all the people that once that happens that are going to spend an eternity in hell burning and suffering and in terrible anguish while they're lounging it out in heaven, and that's okay with them.
Yeah, well, they're going to be raptured, so they don't have to go through the whole, you
It-
know, process of getting old and getting increpid and dying. They can just, you
Boop up
know,
to heaven. Yeah.
just poop up right to heaven. You bet. One of the things that you said that was in my notes, but you reminded me of, was the term "good news." The
Mhm.
Millerites did a lot of publications. They had put out like three different. Were targeting women. They were targeting the science community. They were targeting different people that they're to try to bring them in and to their denomination. And it seems so familiar throughout this entire
Mhm.
episode of how these whether they be religious or not, groups are using their propaganda and the dissemination of propaganda for for their own goals. I was going to say for ill-gotten good, but I don't. Is it ill-gotten if they actually believe what they're doing?
I you just reminded me of something that is in my notes, but it wasn't necessarily, front of mind. It's so easy to laugh about this stuff. It's funny. I mean, it reminds me of, in Parks and Rec, you've got the reasonableists. They sort of joke about that constantly. It's really funny. But and even people at that time found it funny. It was kind of heartbreaking to see that a lot of these Millerites, they were being tormented and mocked by their community after October 22nd, really just pouring salt in the wood. There's Miller was quoted saying these children were running up and said, "Oh, have you not gone up yet?" You know, it's just sort of, you know, sad, but we forget, because this is funny and kind of silly and goofy. There are very real ramifications to holding these end time beliefs. So
Yeah.
it is ill-gotten if a majority of Christians in America believe that Jesus is returning in the next 50 years. Why should they care about climate change? Why should they care about the long-term consequences, or any of our actions, if in the end it's not going to, if they don't think it's going to be an issue? Um, I actually I spoke to a friend who had said, um, she she wanted to take care of the environment because that's what, you know, the Bible says to be a good steward, but God would never let something happen that wasn't in his plan, and so clearly climate change isn't going to be an existential threat, because of course the kingdom will come before that. But please, what were you going to say, Laura?
Oh no, you had just made me think of something from the previous I think it was segment 2 when we did the talk about the church and sexual assault allegations. It kind of justifies the idea what you were just saying, like, oh no, this is part of God's plan, or God will take care of it. It kind of justifies some of the sweeping under the rug aspect of a lot of their actions. Is like the well, it'll all get worked out in the end. God will take care of it. These people will either be forgiven, or if not, it's God's choice. These people who are maybe the sexual assault victims, God knows they're suffering. He has a plan for their suffering, and that works me up more than anything. The idea that, oh, God has a plan for that child that died, or God has a plan for that child that was raped, or whatever the case may be. That really fires me up. But what you were saying, it kind of comes full circle with all of these different articles that we're talking about, where people really do truly believe that, well, yeah, it may not be good right now, but it's all part of God's plan, and that results in a lack of action that could potentially make something better.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
you're 100% there.
I think prediction itself is an excellent area of study for critical thinking. You know, it allows us to delve into and give specific examples of how easily and in what way the human mind is flawed when it comes to how bad our brains are at certain things. And I think that that's the biggest thing I took away from this story. That all of my show notes are about how easily deluded we are, and how bad. Laura's probably fed up of me saying it. I know,
No,
and,
keep
and
saying it.
I
Preach it,
say it
brother.
all the time, all the time.
Yeah.
Our brains are crap. They really are. We're so easily confused by things, and it, you know, this is a prime example. Prediction in any form is a prime example of that. It's so easily unraveled when you look into it. There's no prediction being made ever which is a kind of religious prediction which has got any substance to it that stands up to scrutiny.
Yeah, Richard, this will make you feel better because you were just apologizing. But this is literally the first paragraph of my show notes for this particular one. Okay, question. How many times exactly has the world not ended? Answer: every single time. These articles are great illustrations of the lack of critical thinking and the presence of hypocrisy in the teachings of the church, blah, 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 blah. But you're absolutely right. Critical thinking is the piece that's missing here the most. And it results in, in a lot of
Yeah.
post hoc justifications for why it didn't actually happen the way that they said it was going to happen.
That's true.